Jujutsu Kaisen isn't just dark shonen. It's a shonen story that refuses the genre's safety nets, then proves it by burning down the biggest ones on screen. And it does it by taking away things such as the mentor, the chosen one, and even the hero's control of the story. Today, we're breaking down how Jujutsu Kaisen deconstructs shonen tropes by replacing them with harsher rules. And I'm going to use the biggest moments in the series as proof. Before we start, massive spoiler warning for both anime and manga. Major deaths, arc outcomes, and late game twists. If you're not caught up, tap out now. Also, quick definition. When I say deconstruction, I mean JJK takes classic shonen promises, power growth, mentor protection, heroic momentum, and asks, what if the world doesn't care about those promises at all? Here's how we're doing this. Classic shonen promise, JJK replacement rule, and then what it does to the story. This structure will show the reason JJK feels so brutal isn't because it's violent, it's because its replacement rules are consistent. The series doesn't shock you once and then go back to comfort, it changes the contract. Trope swap number 1. The chosen one becomes a vessel. Classic shonen tends to frame the protagonist as the engine of the story. Even if they start weak, the narrative is bending toward their rise. JJK disrupts that immediately. Yuji isn't introduced as destiny, he's introduced as containment. Sukuna isn't an inner power waiting to be mastered, he's a calamity wearing a human body. And the key difference is what the story refuses to offer. This isn't the inner demon who becomes a partner model. Sukuna isn't Kurama. He doesn't soften, he doesn't bargain for friendship, he uses Yuji as a stage, then proves, repeatedly, that control is not guaranteed. That changes the emotional logic of the series. Growth doesn't automatically mean safety. Progress doesn't automatically mean reward. Sometimes, it just means you survive long enough to understand the scale of what you're up against. Trope swap number 2. Power-ups become conditions. Most shonen power progression is built like a ladder. You train, you unlock the next stage, and you carry that upgrade forward. JJK treats power as conditional, something closer to a contract than a transformation. Techniques have constraints, domain expansions have requirements, binding vows are not flavor, they're structure. Power is something you obtain through limitations, risk, and specificity. So fights don't revolve around who has the higher number. They revolve around who understands the rules, who can adapt faster, and who can impose a condition the other person can't answer. That's why JJK's action feels tactical. It's not escalation for its own sake. It's problem solving under pressure, where the wrong assumption gets punished. Trope swap number 3. Mentor protection becomes mentor removal. In classic shonen, the mentor is a stabilizer. They can't solve everything, but their presence tells you the story won't fall completely apart until the next generation is ready. JJK won't let you lean on that reassurance. Gojo is written like a genre problem. If he is present and free, the world should not be able to threaten the cast in a conventional way. So the story does something very deliberate. It removes him from the board. The prison realm ceiling isn't simply a twist, it's a statement of rules. The series is telling you, strength is not a guarantee of protection, and institutions cannot be relied on to hold the line. And once that safety net is gone, the narrative becomes more honest about what it has been implying all along. The world is larger than any one person's ability to control. Trope swap number 4. The arc reset becomes no comfort. In a lot of shonen, even the darkest arcs eventually return you to a kind of footing. You might lose someone, you might suffer a setback, but the structure reassures you that the story is still carrying you toward stabilization. JJK breaks that contract in Shibuya. This is where the series stops pretending that the world will pause for the heroes to catch up. Gojo is sealed, the city becomes a trap, the death toll rises, Nanami dies, Nobara's fate is left in the limbo that denies the audience closure. And Sukuna is unleashed in a way that turns the inner demon trope into mass catastrophe. The point isn't shock, the point is the new equilibrium. Shibuya doesn't feel like a temporary low point. It feels like the series confirming that consequences are not a detour, they are the road. In other words, the arc doesn't reset. The arc rewrites the world, and the world stays rewritten. Trope swap number 5. Friendship becomes cost. Classic shonen uses relationships as fuel and protection. Bonds create power, bonds save people, bonds keep the story from crossing certain lines. JJK treats bonds differently. Relationships still matter, but they don't function like armor, they function like stakes. The Junpei storyline is the early warning. The series sets up the shape of a familiar rescue arc. Connection, empathy, the possibility of pulling someone back, and then removes that comfort to teach you what kind of story this is. Nanami becomes a symbol of the adult the younger cast needs, and when he's taken out, it's not just sadness, it's the removal of stability. The story is showing you that meaning doesn't prevent loss, meaning deepens it. And with Nobara, the uncertainty in self becomes part of the method. JJK refuses the clean, reassuring closure that shonen often grants. It lets absence linger. So friendship still matters, but in this series, it often matters because it makes consequences heavier, not because it cancels them. Trope swap number 6. Victory becomes escalation. In the classic formula, surviving the big arc leads to regrouping. You reorganize, you train, the world restabilizes long enough for the next act. JJK does not offer that rhythm. After Shibuya, the story formalizes instability. The culling game is not just a new arc, it's a machine. It creates a self-sustaining conflict system where even small wins don't restore balance, because the structure keeps producing new pressures. Progress becomes less about climbing and more about enduring. The cast gains knowledge, strategies, allies, but the world keeps widening and splintering. The story isn't narrowing toward a comforting, linear path. It's expanding into a controlled chaos where the rules themselves are hostile. So victory doesn't feel like resolution. It feels like permission for the next layer of consequences to begin. Before we go further, a second warning, because this is where the manga escalates the thesis with the biggest turning points. So massive spoilers from here. Now, if you want the clearest proof that JJK isn't simply dark, it's this. The story is willing to destroy the genre's most reliable safety blankets on purpose, and it does it repeatedly. Start with what happens to Megami. In a traditional shonen structure, the deuteragonist, especially one as important as Megami, has a kind of narrative protection. The story might threaten him, but it typically preserves the shape of hope. The friend can be saved, the rival can return, the bond remains recoverable. JJK doesn't just threaten that, it corrupts it at the root. Sukuna taking Megami isn't a villain gets stronger moment. It's an inversion of multiple shonen promises at once. The friend is not merely endangered, he's compromised. The hero can't respond with simple force without destroying what he's trying to protect. And the villain gains not just a body, but access to an entire strategic identity. It turns shonen's emotional anchor, saving your friend, into a dilemma with no clean move. Then comes the most direct statement the manga makes about narrative comfort. Gojo returns. In many shonen, this is a turning point where the audience exhales. The strongest is back, which means the story has a safety mechanism again. JJK uses that exhale against you. Gojo vs. Sukuna is framed like a collision between gods, and the series lets you believe, briefly, that the old reassurance might return. And then it does what most shonen will not do. Gojo loses, Gojo dies. This is not simply shock value, it is the story removing the single largest safety blanket it ever had, in order to confirm the replacement rules. Strength does not guarantee victory, popularity does not guarantee survival, and narrative importance does not guarantee protection. That's the contract, and the manga signs it in blood. One more thing, because it's central to the deconstruction claim. JJK refuses the redeemable inner monster. Sukuna is not a misunderstood power. He's not a tragic ally. He is a pure antagonist presence that benefits from the protagonist's existence. That matters because shonen often frames the monster's power inside the hero as something that ultimately supports the hero's journey. JJK says, sometimes the monster is just a monster, and if you carry it, the cost will not be fair. So, is JJK the first shonen to challenge shonen? No. The genre has been evolving for decades. But JJK's contribution is how decisively it mainstreams its harsher framework. Consequence over comfort, systems over simple villains, power as conditional leverage, and narrative momentum that does not guarantee reward. And it still manages to remain recognizably shonen. Stylish fights, memorable characters, and iconic set pieces. It doesn't abandon the genre, it expands it. In other words, classic shonen isn't dead. JJK is simply one of the clearest examples of a newer lane, where the story refuses to promise you that things will turn out okay. So here's my question. Which trope swap do you think JJK breaks the hardest? The mentor safety net, the arc reset, or the chosen one assumption? And if you want a part 2, I can go deeper on 1 or 3 topics. JJK's power system as a restriction engine, Sukuna as the anti-inner demon, or why JJK's major losses land differently than most shonen. This has been Reserved Otaku. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay reserved, stay otaku.